All right, good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Austin Teague. I work for BSX Athletics in the marketing department, and today we have a very special Google Hangout or live stream with Matt Hanson. Say hello, Matt.
Hello, thanks for having me today.
Glad, we're very excited to have you here. So just kind of we'll share some accolades with everyone just so they're familiar with who you are if they're just living under a rock and not sure what's going on in the triathlete world. So Matt Hanson is the 2015 IronMan Texas champion. So congrats, which also makes him the North American IronMan champion. He also holds the run course records at Texas, at Coeur d'Alene, and is the inaugural Ironman champ at Chattanooga. So congrats, that's quite a number of accolades you got there. So Matt, just to start off, I want to ask you a few questions, just quick fire questions. What do you normally eat the morning of a race?
The morning of a race, I have no solid food. I usually have 2 servings of First Endurance Ultragen. I usually do that at about 3 a.m. Before a full Ironman, and then I'll have the typical vitamins and everything that I take on a daily basis, but no solid food morning of.
Nice. So you told me when we first started talking that you do a lot of your training indoors on a treadmill. What kind of gets you motivated and going while you're just kind of sitting there running there? Is it music, TV? Do you like to watch races? Maybe a favorite TV show?
I don't listen to much music. I don't watch races very often. During the winter, the thing that gets me through the longer training rides and runs, mostly training rides, is I kind of schedule them around unfortunately, I'm a Gophers fan. Minnesota. I was born in Minnesota. They finally had a good season this year, so it was fun to be able to. I think I watched every single one of their games from my bike seat. And then the next day I would watch the Vikings fail miserably, and again, usually on my bike seat for that too. During the week, I don't typically watch for the shorter workouts. I want to be able to focus on what I'm doing, so I don't always watch something. Sometimes I'll have just the TV on for noise, but that, during the week rides, they're usually higher intensity, and I want to kind of, again, be concentrating on what I'm doing.
Nice. I can respect that. So kind of that was all the short questions I had for you. Not many. But as we go along, people, you are free to tweet at us at BSX Athletics. We will be monitoring that and kind of interject questions that people have throughout this Google Hangout. Or you can also tweet at Matt Hanson. Here's his Twitter handler right there. Hopefully it's the right way you can read it. So you can do one or the other. So Matt, kind of want to get a little bit of background about what you do for work,
Okay.
as well as kind of your athletic background. I think it's very unique and kind of not something that you see every day.
Okay, sure. So currently I'm working as a professor of exercise science at Buena Vista University in Storm Lake, Iowa. I am in charge of the human performance program there, and I teach ex-phys, nutrition, principles of conditioning, and a few other exercise science related courses, depending on the year and the current situation we're in and things like that. So that's the model that we have here at BV in our exercise science department as well, and most of our other departments have adopted this model as well, is of a practicing clinician. I've worked as an athletic trainer, and when I was teaching athletic training classes, I was working athletic training with whatever sports team I was, with a number of different sports teams. All of our athletic trainers have, are currently working as athletic trainers. Our PE instructor has taught in PE and is very involved in that venue still as well. And then obviously I'm competing and in triathlon, and so that kind of helps me keep the model that we have, which has been really important to us. It's been nice to be able to, when I'm talking about cardiovascular drift or something like that, I can bring up a file from a race or a workout that didn't go well, or that, something like that came up, and so they can, the students can see that, yeah, it's not just something that's in a textbook that you're supposed to learn. It actually happens, and you can easily say it's very important, because when you show them what happens to speed and all those other things, so I've been able to use both to help me quite a bit. In terms of athletic background, I've always been a runner, but I never really focused on the run, if that makes any sense. I actually ran my first 1 mile race when I was 3 years old. And, always looked forward to running with my dad. After work, he would come home, and we would go on a run together. Well, it started off with, I would run his warm up with him. He would drop me off and go and run the rest of the workout. And then once I got to about 7th grade, we were running together for the entire time. And then once about 8th or 9th grade hit, I would run the warm up with him, drop him off, and then go on the run myself. But that was a way that I could spend time with my dad. And that was always really important to me growing up. Wrestling was my most important sport. I competed in cross country and track in high school, and a little bit in college as well, but it wasn't ever my focus. I loved to wrestle. I ran to be able to wrestle the way I did. I was not stronger than anybody I wrestled in my entire career. I'm pretty convinced of that. I was always kind of, if I was within 5 points in the third period, I was going to win the match. And so that's why, I always ran the way I did and it was to make me a better wrestler. Unfortunately, in college, I dislocated my hip, and that ended my wrestling career. And so then obviously I took a year of recovery and everything after that. And then I started to run a little bit. I competed in cross country and track, but I was an athletic training major. And so I had to be involved in both or in rotations all year round. So I never really focused on training. I was always going to other practices, running on my own a little bit. And then I would just kind of show up to the meets, and the coach didn't really care too much as long as I showed up and scored at the conference meet. He was fine with it. But then I didn't get really into triathlon until 2011 was my first Ironman at Coeur d'Alene. When I was 16, I wrote a list of goals, 50 goals to accomplish in the next 10 years, and one of them was to compete in Ironman triathlon. And I carried that piece of paper around with me all the time in my wallet until it expired essentially at my 26th birthday. And Coeur d'Alene was one that I could go after, and it was still open for registration. So I registered for it, trained, and got ready to go. I did an Olympic distance triathlon or two leading into the race, and then Coeur d'Alene was my first one, and then I kind of went from there. So
nice, very cool. What's been your favorite race venue that you've kind of raced since then?
The most scenic one is definitely Kona. I mean, it's beautiful. I've never felt like I had a good race there. The last time I did it as an amateur in 2013, I had 2 flats, and it's hard to get over that. I'm over it now, I swear. But I've always competed well at Ironman Texas. I have a lot of friends that live on that course in the Woodlands. I spend a lot of time training down there. So if I were to pick a race to have my A race at every year, it would be at Ironman Texas. Just it's a good course for me from a physical level. It's a good course for me on a, kind of an emotional level, just because a lot's happened there. That's where I got my pro card. I know a lot of people on the course. Both my coaches live in the area, and of course, this last win was all right too. So.
Yeah, I bet. Speaking of, do you want to give us kind of like a brief, or you can talk as long as you want about kind of like a race recap and how you did and went throughout the swim, bike, and run?
Sure. The race really went is about as well as I could have hoped for in terms of all three disciplines. The swim was a lot slower than I anticipated, which I was fine with. There was no need to really extend myself and drive the pace with the pack swimming the way it was. Unfortunately, the lead group was able to put a pretty big gap on us. I didn't realize how big that gap was at the time. I mean, you really get no feedback during swimming. You just swim. And, I wasn't, I could sight enough ahead that it wasn't going to make any sense to either A, pull the group, or B, swim off by myself. So I sat in and just had a comfortable swim. Got off to the bike, did a lot of work early on in the first hour and a half. I think the pack that I came in on off the bike came in off the swim was about 7 minutes behind, and about 90 minutes into the ride, we had whittled that down to 2 minutes. We had just getting to the point where we could see the group ahead of us on the hills, and then they started attacking and put some time into us again. We had a couple other riders that came up and joined our group and started to essentially attack our group, and which was as planned. I don't think anybody was surprised about that. I went with a couple of the riders, Lionel and Joe, for a while, and then just got to the point where I was able to stick with them, but I wasn't able to stick with them and stick to my race plan. And so I had to make the decision to be smart and to stick with the process and let everything figure it out as it went. And then finished up the ride without any incidents, I guess, and then got onto the run course. And then just again, when I raced in Ironman Chattanooga, I really wanted to get to the lead as fast as I could. I had learned from Ironman Texas in 2013, I think was the first year that I did it, that the heat can really come back at you. In 2013, I was on pace for about a 250, and at about mile 22, something happened. Everything went dark, and I ended up with a 3 flat or a 259 or something like that. And that thought was definitely in the back of my head as I approached the race and looked at what the weather was going to be at for the day. And so the best decision, the smartest decision, was to run conservative and just unleash it at a certain point throughout the race after mile 18 or 20, depending on how everything was going, if need be. And I was able to just kind of keep things steady and stick for the most part at target pace early on until I took the lead, essentially.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. So you are a coach as well,
Yep.
along with racing. You want to kind of give a little plug for your website?
Sure. I coached with a group beforehand, and then it just became kind of a business decision in January to start off on my own. So it's pretty simple. It's just matthansoncoaching.com. But I'm looking forward to putting some time into that and growing that business side of things and coaching side of things here over the summer. And yeah, it's going really well. And with the knowledge base that I have, I really think that coaching is a natural fit. It's something that I love doing. And so, yeah, it's definitely something I'm going to put a lot of energy into here shortly.
Nice. Very nice. There's your website and everything. So check it out for sure. Matt's an awesome athlete, but also an awesome coach. So kind of I have down that one question that someone had asked is kind of how would you compare the data that you've received using BSX to other forms of metabolic testing that you have used in the past?
I've actually, I'm relatively new to discussing things with BSX, so I haven't done the BSX test myself. So the first time I actually got interested in BSX, I knew a guy that worked in there with from a previous contact, and I actually wanted to see what his thoughts were about me and a couple of students of mine doing a validation study, and that's kind of where the whole thing started. At that point, we were definitely not in a position in my build where I was going to do a lactate threshold test. Jeremy was joking with me that he wanted me to do one the week of the Ironman, and I was, yeah, get right on that one. So I've only seen the graphs and the data that that you guys have collected and showed me a few of. In terms of lactate threshold testing, you know, I can probably speak to that a little bit more clearly. I mean, research has shown that lactate threshold testing is a little bit better of an indicator of performance than VO2 max. And the reason, you know, there's a number of reasons that is, but you can have a very high VO2 max, but obviously if you can't hold a certain percentage of it over a period of time, then that doesn't do you much good. And so by understanding lactate threshold, you can theoretically be much more in tune with what you need to do as an athlete, or as a coach giving that information to an athlete.
Yeah, very true. How we talked about lactate threshold just then. How do you use kind of the curve? So basically, the LT1 of someone where they're starting to tap into their kind of their anaerobic system, and then as well as their LT2, so where they're full on anaerobic. How do you use those 2 points to kind of change out a training plan, make sure kind of an athlete's getting the most out of their sessions?
Okay, good question. So in general, again, like I said, I'm fairly new here with this stuff, but most of the athletes don't have lactate threshold test data to give me, and so essentially you do field tests to try to determine LT1 and LT2, and the thing that I think that there's a bit of a disconnect here on is that a lot of people find one marker, and usually it's like do a 20-minute power test or something like that, and then they'll use that to determine every one of your training zones based on the percentages that others have done in the past. And there's a lot of validity to doing it that way, but it's really hard for me to accept the fact that I'll use Austin and I, since we're kind of talking together right now anyways, that Austin is going to have the same efficiency being able to use his, at aerobic capacity as a percentage of his anaerobic capacity as I do, because we're different genetically, we're different training wise. And so I don't usually, when I'm working with an athlete, I don't usually set up a specific zone based on those percentages. I give them zones based on a number of different things, not just one test. LT1 and LT2 does have the potential of doing that, especially as it becomes more easily measured.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. So we have a random user question submitted, so it's time for that.
Okay.
How can I fit, so this person, not me personally, how can I fit the running schedule into my riding schedule without affecting my riding performance? This person's a Cat 3 road cyclist or bike cyclist.
Honestly, I don't think you're going to like the answer to that one. There's a reason that most triathletes aren't running open marathons, that aren't also competing as a professional cyclist at that time. You kind of have to pick one and focus on it. any training from one is probably going to detract a little bit from the other. Now, am I saying that you can't maintain a category 3 cyclist and still compete in a triathlon at any level? No. You can still do that. But am I saying that you probably won't compete at the highest level possible? Yeah, unfortunately, that's kind of the way it goes. In order to maintain the position, or improve, which I'm assuming that you want to do if you're a Cat 3 cyclist, in order to continue to improve, you have to spend a great deal of time there. And time that you spend working on the run or the swim, you mentioned run, so I don't know if you're a duathlete or if you're talking triathlon, but either way, time you spend focusing on that is going to detract a little bit from the performance gains that you could be getting on the bike. So you really do have to prioritize, have builds that are specific to what you're trying to accomplish in either cycling or duathlon or triathlon. Now, can you do both in a calendar year? That's splitting hairs. That is probably a different story.
I don't know. The truth sometimes hurts. So another question kind of related to training that someone has submitted is, how long do I need to constantly train to see measurable fitness gains?
Okay, another very common question. Everybody wants to know how long till I'm there, and unfortunately, you can't quantify that with an answer in any way, shape, or form, because there's so many variables. One is, what is your starting point? If you're starting from couch or very sedentary, you're going to be able to improve really quickly, and it might be 2 or 3 weeks before you see measurable gains. If you're already at competing at a very high level, the gains could be 1 to 2%, and that could take quite a while. The training strategy that you're using, the training period that you're currently in your typical periodization schedule is going to affect it. How much time you're spending training is going to affect it. So again, there's no, hey, it's going to take you 6 weeks to get measurable. I mean, unfortunately, everybody is different in how they respond to training. Everybody's different in where they're currently at. So I just, without, that's about the best answer I can give. Sorry, it's so vague, but you can't expand on it.
Not a problem. How do you go about managing your athletes and kind of developing training zones that are specific to that individual? Because everyone, is going to react differently to a training zone, as well as kind of mentally and physically.
Okay. My kind of approach to coaching is very much based on building personalized plans, personalized goals, and as well the relationship. I mean, so many people just hand out, hey, here's a plan. This is what I want you to do this week. And it's very generic and very vague. And it's, you spend this much time in zone 1, spend this much time in zone 2, this much time in zone 3. And to me, that's only a very small piece of the pie. You have to understand exactly how the athlete's responding to that by looking at daily feedback. You have to understand how they are, what they want to accomplish, how much time they have to give, and a number of other things like that. In terms of creating zones, usually I start by the generic tests that depending on the athlete, which one they want to do. They've been validated, right? And so there's a reason to start there, but that's just a start. It's not the end. Again, a lot of people are going to say, oh, here's my zones, and it's going to be that way until the next time I do this 20-minute test. Well, I mean, like me personally as an athlete, I've never felt like I nailed a 20-minute test. I don't train for the 20-minute test. We just do it randomly, and so, thankfully I have a really good coach who says, okay, this is just a piece of the pie. We're also going to do this, 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 and this. And, we're going to kind of see how you are as a athlete rather than how you are at competing this 20-minute test, just as an example. And I take that approach as well. I've certainly been influenced greatly by both of the coaches that I have. I'm working with them still for a reason, and will definitely continue doing so. And they've obviously influenced me, but the educational background is definitely influenced the way I approach things as well. Did I get at what you were wanting there? Or?
Yeah. That was great. Are you able to give us maybe 2 key running and cycling workouts that anyone can go and do that that you feel could help them kind of move their LT or improve? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Sure. I'm not going to give a specific workout because it's very different for where you are, what you're doing, and what you've done in the past. The things to understand are concepts like work to rest ratio, and when the way to increase lactate threshold is by doing intervals. You really aren't going to do lactate threshold training by riding at a steady effort. Or the most efficient way to do it anyway is by intervals. And so work to rest ratio is really important. It can be as low as like 1 to 1, 1 to 2, but even more than that. And you can go on 20-minute intervals and all the way down to 1 to 2 minute intervals. One's probably pretty short, but 2-minute intervals or greater if you're trying to focus on lactate clearance. Another way to increase your creation of lactate is to another way to move that lactate threshold is to reduce the amount that you're creating. And to do that, it's a very different approach. And so then you're trying to increase your aerobic capacity, increase muscular strength, and the workouts are going to be very, very different. So for the coaches out there, I typically won't give a specific workout, because then all of a sudden you'll have 20 people doing that exact same workout, and I just don't think that's appropriate. The best way to go about it is to learn or spend a little bit of time looking at rest to or work to rest ratio and what you're doing. Have a set period of time to work on the lactate threshold or increasing lactate. Have a specific period of time to work on increasing your aerobic capacity. You can't do this in one workout that's just randomly thrown in there throughout the week. It has to be a focus for a significant period of time, and that significant period of time is dependent on a number of different factors. So again, a fairly vague answer, but I think it comes from a more of an education approach rather than just here's a fish, trying to teach to, anyways.
Yeah, the old analogy where you can give a guy a fish, every day, but you'd rather teach him how to fish, or teach him how to fish. There we go. So we have a question on Twitter from Josh Turwood. He wants to know, what would you say has resulted in the greatest amount of improvement on the bike in the last year for you?
Honestly, the greatest improvement that I had on the bike is getting into a better position. And I can't, answer that any better way. I'm compared to last year, the position I am in on the QR is much better for a number of reasons. I can get a little bit longer, which is where I want to be. I think that by getting into there's a current debate going around on this right now. Again, it's been there for a while. Personally, I like the longer position because it opens up the hip angle. It prevents the hip flexor from being very tight, which can give some low back pain. It can also prevent the hip extension when running. So if you can get the hip flexor to relax as much as possible when you're cycling, that's going to help your run as well. I spent some time in the velodrome working on aerodynamics, and we made a lot of good changes. Positive things came from that. I worked with Jim at ERO, I believe, for that, which was a great experience. We learned a lot about what worked. I continued to dial in my nutrition. That's helped as well. And obviously the physical side of things I've improved as well. But when you look at power to speed ratio, This year I'm sitting much better than I have in previous years, and that was, definitely played a lot to the the bump that I've seen over time. Specifically, the improvements I've made. I've been working with Coach David on the bike essentially since about 3 weeks before Ironman Texas last year. And the biggest change is the specificity of the workouts. Everything that I do, I'm given a specific power interval for. There's never just go ride out in zone 2 and have a good day. It's I want you for this amount of time between, it's usually a 5 to 10 watt window, and everything is very, very specific. And again, we talk, Coach David and I talk all the time. The reason I'm working with him as well as Coach Tim is because their physiology-based approach, which I agree with as well. And so everything is very specific to me. He may be working with 2 or 3 different athletes for the same race, and the general goals could be the same for each period, but the workouts are very specific to me, and that's been what's helped me the most from a physical standpoint as well. Sorry, Josh, that was a long answer. We could have just talked about that while we're running together on the 3rd loop.
I'm sure he doesn't mind. We have another Twitter question from May. Her question is, what is a typical day like for you? Because you have to balance training, work, and personal plans. So how do you balance all that?
Good question. That's something that I made a very strong commitment to this year, is being better about that. Or I guess this academic school year. In the past, I didn't do a great job of making time for family, especially my wife, and that wasn't fair to her. And that's important to me. And so this year, this is my typical schedule was 6 o'clock wake up and come to my office. I would do class prep, grading, whatever I needed to do for the day. Teach from typically 8 to noon in the morning, and then I swim every day at noon. And I have from noon to 1 to get my swim in. That's the only time the pool is open for me, and so that's by design, or by necessity, I guess. And then typically from about 1:15 to whenever I am done for the day, usually about 2 or 3 o'clock, depending on committee meetings and all that type of thing, student meetings and that, I take off and I get my bike or run in for that day. That works well for me because most of the exercise science students, we have about 85% of the students in my major are right now involved in college athletics. And so none of them are free to meet with me between 3 and 5 anyways, because they're all at practice or on the road or at a game. So that getting in early allowed me time to meet with them beforehand, which they loved, I'm sure, having to meet with me at 6:30. But that was the time that worked into both of our schedules. And then so my bike, I would typically bike or run after work and be done by 6:30 to have dinner with my wife. And then obviously on the weekends, there were my long training days.
And everything's down to a schedule, minute.
Yeah, and if the schedule changes, it's very stressful for me. I'm a little bit type A in that regard, but and the other reason is because everything's so packed in there that's kind of the way it has to be.
Yeah, that make my day look pretty easy, stress free. So we have some kind of questions that people submitted through email. I'm going to go through those.
Sure.
Can you describe how electronics, such as power meters and BSXinsight, change the way you train?
In general, they can be great information if you know how to use it. If you don't understand what lactate threshold is, it's not going to be very helpful to you. If you don't understand how to read a power meter, it's not going to be very helpful to you. I mean, even the same way with heart rate. If you don't know what it means and what's going on and can't see a trend over time, then then it's just going to get in the way. You're going to focus on it. You know, a lot of people use it as a way to measure to compare with each other, for lack of a better term, and use it as a competition. That's fine. But if you really know how to use the information, then any information that you can get can be valuable. And is it going to, you know, is there one piece of information that can absolutely make or break your training? No, you can make it work. You know, I'm fine coaching people with just heart rate. I'm fine coaching them with heart rate and power. I'm fine, you know, and you do with, you know, what you have available. Obviously, financial resources play a little bit of a role in what gadgets that you're able to get. But the thing that I would stress is if you know what information you're dealing with, then it can be helpful.
Very true. Very, very true. So another question is, let's see, to get a big aerobic capacity, do you do most of your bulk, or do you do most of your training at level 2 or zone 2?
Me personally, no. The best way to have a big aerobic capacity is to choose your parents wisely. Unfortunately, a large portion of VO2 max is genetics. Now, you know, it is certainly trainable, and you can increase it, and you can increase it by spending a lot of time in zone 2. And that the reason that a lot of people are told to do that is because obviously it works, and 2 is because it's low impact and low injury, you know, low percent of injury. But with my schedule, that's not going to work for me personally. And so I have to adapt. And with a lot of the age groupers that I work with, that I coach, that's very much the same. I don't think people really understand the amount of time that they have to spend in their aerobic zone to go after increasing VO2 in that way. There's a lot of different ways that you can go about that. And again, it goes back to understanding work to rest ratios and percentage of overall power and things like that. Personally, I think I've spent less than 40% of my time spent training in 2015 in zone 2. A lot of that is warm up and recovery. Now, that doesn't mean I don't do big, you know, blocks in zone 2. My aerobic block essentially ended in December. And so as soon as I hit January, I had a shift. And so, you know, I don't want to say, oh yeah, never spend any time in zone 2. I haven't seen exactly what we'll do here for my next block of training. But if I was a betting man, it would probably be back to a zone 2, spend some, you know, good quality time just in the saddle and in the running shoes.
Those are always fun zones to be in.
Yeah, you can get a lot of good thinking time in there.
Yes, listen to a lot of music, TV shows, podcasts, everything. Yeah. So another question was kind of more related to anaerobic. And what kind of percent of time do you spend in anaerobic for IronMan? So it could be IronMan Texas, just in general.
Okay. For the answer to that is good. You know, for me as a coach, coaching age groupers is going to be very different than me as an athlete on a pro level, because as an age group athlete, you can race your own race. You don't have to really worry what's going on around you until maybe the last, you know, 6 miles of the run, if you're in a foot race for somebody, for an age group slot to Kona or something like that. But that's where I think the race should actually start. Before that, you should stick to the plan. And so often you see people walking around on the run course, they're walking and talking about how good their bike split was. And, you know, I firmly come from the mentality that there is no such thing as a good bike course or bike leg unless it's followed by a good run leg. And, you know, for an age grouper, most of the time is going to be spent in the aerobic zone for the competition. For me personally, you know, I'm given, my coach gives me power numbers that, okay, for this is going to be your max 20-minute power to hit, the max 5-minute power, or 10-minute, 5-minute, 2-minute, 30 seconds. And so it's not it's hard to answer that question with a good percentage, because every race is going to be different. In Chattanooga, I was able to ride very much aerobically, and run very much aerobically. This year at Ironman Texas, I had to put in some really hard intervals. I put in a few 2 and 3 minute intervals that essentially depleted my W prime, and then but we've spent a lot of time training at my training to recover while at the top of, or at my goal race pace. So again, it really depends on what you're going at. For an age grouper, the only time you're anaerobic may be the very start of the race to get some clean water to swim in, or to get on the feet that you want to get on, and coming out of a few turns on the bike to get back up to speed might be a good time to push that. But I wouldn't suggest much time outside of that.
Nice. How many hours do you typically spend a month kind of recovery training?
Very little, very few. Let's see if I can find that quick. Yeah, I think less than, or around 15% of my total time is in the recovery zone. And again, mostly cool down, warm up. Again, that'll probably change over the summer when time becomes more abundant. But right now we have to be very, very efficient with what we're doing. Now with my athletes, I do that a little bit differently, but again, it depends on the amount of time that they have to train, where we're at in the build, and a number of different factors.
Nice. So I guess the last question that we have from people is there a certain percent of overload intensity that you go for in each discipline in your training plan from which you adjust for your race day goals?
Is there a certain percentage of overload intensity that you go for in each discipline in your training plan? The general rule of thumb for overload is 10% total volume / intensity per week. This is really difficult to do as a hard and fast rule. So I will use that in terms of training stress, and look at the bike score for the week, the swim score for the week, and the run score for the week. I do use that a little bit. I do use time as a metric, slowly increase time. But again, you can't just use one or the other. Sorry, you can't use one or the other. You have to. It has to be a combination of both. If you're saying, oh well, time is going to be the metric that I'm using, and then all of a sudden you do 60 minutes one week that's a hammer fest in zone 3, and you do 60 minutes the next week, or 75 minutes the next week at the low end of zone 2, you're kind of all over the place there in terms of volume and intensity. And so I do use that as a piece of the pie, but typically at the beginning of the season, or at the beginning of a build for an athlete, I'll set my periodization schedule that I want to follow, and that's kind of the backbone of the training plan. And then I adjust so I have the percentages of what they want, and then I adjust the metrics to give specific power and specific pace for them to work with for each workout.
Very cool. I guess I lied. That wasn't the last question.
Okay.
One more is just kind of, I guess, what advice do you have for someone who's just starting out with triathlons? And then what kind of general advice do you have for someone who's, maybe competed in a few and wants to continue to improve?
Okay. Just starting out in triathlon, the first place that you have to build is the aerobic base, and you're going to see the biggest performance gains if you've never done anything like that by learning how to be consistent in your training, and be very spend some time building the aerobic base. After that, so that's usually up to the, you know, first half or maybe the first Ironman. I don't know. It depends on the athlete. But after you have a firm aerobic base, then you can start to do a lot of the anaerobic style training, and then you're going to benefit more from that. Once you've got an aerobic base built up, you're going to be less prone to injury then as well. For both individuals, consistency in training is the key. You can't just train on the weekends and think that you're going to be able to reach your full potential. If your goal is to finish, that's a little bit of a different story. But if you're trying to do as best as you can, consistency in training has to be the biggest factor. And when I say consistency in training, it's not just going through the motions, but it's, you know, kind of focusing day in and day out on what you're doing and why you're doing it. Follow a good plan. Hopefully from a knowledgeable individual. I'm not saying that, you know, buying training plans is not is a bad idea. That's not what I'm saying at all. But there's some really good ones out there, and then there's some that are really generic as well. And the key is to figure out which ones are going to work for you in your time frame, and which ones are you know, have a backbone in, you know, somewhat of a, you know, physiological research-based approach.
Nice. Well, thank you. We definitely appreciate you sharing some knowledge with us. And I'll put up your info again one more time, plug for you. So you can tweet at him. You can go check out his coaching. He's awesome. Can't say enough great things about you, Matt. We definitely appreciate you coming on and enlightening us as well as, you know, all our fans.
All right. Well, thank you very much again for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. And if you want some more information about BSX, of course, we have to do a plug for our company. You can go check out our blog right here or visit BSXinsight.com. We have a bunch of resources also somewhere on this page. So again, thanks, Matt. We really appreciate it. We wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Come up races, and we're pulling for you in Kona.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, take care.
Yeah, you too.